Evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name's Richard, and I'm from the Government Digital Service in the Cabinet Office. I'm a digital accessibility specialist or accessibility specialist. I don't consider myself to be an expert. I think you're only an expert once you die, basically. You've always got capability of learning. I'm always going to be learning new stuff, and I know a bit about accessibility, I know a bit about assistive technology, but I've got lots to learn, lots to find out. I just want to help you understand a bit about assistive technology. If you're familiar with this, it might be a bit sort of repetitive, but hopefully you'll learn something from this. I'm just going to go through a few different types of assistive technology, talk through them and show you them hopefully, and if the demos work live, then that will be great. So that's me. So what is assistive technology? What does it mean? Anybody got any ideas, just in general terms, what assistive technology is? Shout it out.
Anything that makes life easier.
Sounds good. Anything that makes life easier. So that sounds like a good definition. That's a good general definition. I've got one definition which is quite topical today. Any plugin that mines cryptocurrency without you being aware, it's not really that, but it's been in the news, obviously, with things about browser loud. That's a bit of a sort of red herring, if you like, but this is what I would sort of say is a good definition of accessibility. So any object or system that helps or maintains the capabilities of people with disabilities or any kind of needs, anything that makes life easier in many different ways. So thinking about some examples, first of all, in the non-digital world, assistive technology, what's the most common piece of assistive technology is probably glasses or contact lenses. So there's a number of different things you can think of in terms of assistive technology that help in the various different ways. So we're thinking about different needs here in terms of vision, in terms of hearing, in terms of motor skills, and in terms of cognition or cognitive skills. Where does assistive technology fit in here? And thinking about the non-digital world, it's things like obviously glasses, contact lenses, magnifying glasses. Those sort of things are used for helping with vision. With hearing, you're thinking about things like hearing aids. You might be thinking about captions on TV, that sort of thing, although that is sort of digital. With motor skills, thinking about physical difficulties, it might be a walking stick, something as simple as that, walking frame, those sort of things. There might be more complex technology used. And then with cognition, cognitive skills, an example might be something like printing things on a lower contrast background. So for someone who's dyslexic, that can help, or using less complex fonts, avoiding italics, things like that. So those sort of things in the physical world, if you like. And it's very similar in the digital world. So thinking about the digital world, what sort of examples there are. I don't know if you've seen this chart before, Alistair uses this a lot, and it helps to explain the principles of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It shows the three of them there: perceive, understand, and operate. The fourth one is robust, which is about the technology side of things. But in terms of the three principles, so perceiving is being able to receive information through one of your senses. So either through the sense of sight, hearing, or touch. Those are the three senses that you would receive information through. From an accessibility point of view, it's important to make things receivable to you through the sense that you can use, or the senses that you can use. So then secondly, there's understanding. Can you understand the content? You can read a Chinese website, but you may not understand it if you don't speak Chinese. So it's understanding. Is it in the right sort of language? Is it plain English if you're an English language website? Is it clear what things mean? Is it clear what labels mean, instructions mean, media player controls, those sort of things? Is it all understandable? And then the third principle there is about operating. So can you operate things in the way you need to, which may be using a mouse, might be using keyboard, might be using a trackpad, but may not be. It may be you have to use other means. So it might be you need to use, you can't use your hands for it, so you might need to use something like voice recognition or voice activation. Or it might be something like a switch device, which can be used to operate websites. So assistive technology, when we're talking about digital assistive technology, if you like, empowers people. It enables people to access information, whether that's on the web or just generally through stuff on the desktop, stuff on mobile devices. And it enables you to operate things. So it enables you to fill in forms, to send emails, to access links, navigate between pages, all those sort of things. So it empowers that when it's done right, when it works, and when websites are set up to work with assistive technology. In other words, they're designed and built with standards and designed and built in the correct way. It not only empowers someone to do that, but it then gives people confidence to be able to do that on other websites and to be able to do it on other technologies, other systems. It's about a year and a half ago now when we published the results of the Assistive Technology survey at GDS, and that was used to help us determine what was the best way of testing software. So which sort of assistive technologies are in use for a start. So this shows that screen magnifiers and screen readers are the most popular assistive technologies, which is exactly what we expected. But the survey gave a lot more detail about how much different types of screen readers were used. So we found out that JAWS was the most popular, which again wasn't a big surprise. We found that Zoomtext was the most popular screen magnifier. So we used this survey to help us determine what is good for testing with. And these are the sort of common combinations that we found from that survey. So, for example, JAWS, as I said, is the most popular screen reader, but also it's most commonly used with Internet Explorer. Whereas NVDA, which is a more recent free screen reader, perhaps not quite as capable as JAWS, but still very good, is more commonly used with Firefox. Obviously then there's things like VoiceOver, which is available on Mac devices and Apple devices, Apple iPhone, Apple iPad. And again, that's most commonly used with Safari, which is something that often have to remind people that if you're going to test things with VoiceOver, it's best not to use Chrome as the browser because it's not the most commonly used browser with VoiceOver, and there are some problems with that. The most commonly used voice activation software is Dragon Naturally Speaking, or Dragon Dictate. That started out as dictation software. It's been adapted to become more usable with web, with technology generally, to be able to operate things, to be able to fill in forms. It can be a bit clunky, but it is good. It's really, really useful for helping to access the web. People are using voice recognition more and more. Most people use it on their phones, so it's becoming more mainstream, to be honest. And that might mean that Dragon isn't so common in the future, but at the moment it is the most commonly used one. And then the final section there is about Zoomtext, which is a screen magnifier. Within operating systems like Windows and OS X and iOS, there is built-in screen magnification. There's also screen magnification built into the browser, browser magnification, browser zoom if you like. But that has limitations. It only goes so far, and it's not as flexible. So Zoomtext is a much more flexible product that does a lot more than that. And again, that's commonly used with Internet Explorer. So, demo. This is more interesting bit. These are the things I'm going to try and show you. So just 3 examples. One screen reader, which is JAWS. One voice activation, voice recognition, which is Dragon. And one screen magnification, which is Zoomtext. I just kind of picked a website fairly at random, but I wanted something that looked a bit interesting, had a bit of information in it, but not something that was overwhelming. I started to look at things like newspaper websites and broadcasting websites, and they tend to be very complex with a lot of information. So I wanted something a bit easier to follow and understand. But what I'm going to do is start up JAWS and let you listen to that. It's Save the Children.
UK vertical bar global children's charity dash Internet Explorer. Save the Children UK vertical bar global children's charity.
Okay. So the first thing that screen readers do when you open a page is it will announce the title of the page, and that isn't necessarily the heading that's on the page, it's actually the title element. So it's important to get that right. It's important to make sure that people understand what the website is about, but also within a website or within a service or a form, it's important to know where you are. So, you know, are you filling in address details, for example, on a payment form, or are you filling in your card details? It really helps people understand where they are. So title is the first thing that's read out. You can read through the whole page. Jules will happily read through a whole page for you, but that isn't generally how people use screen reader software. Like anyone, you would tend to skim read things. You're looking for particular information, or you're just trying to gather information from a web page. So you might skim read through it, you might read through headings on the page, you might look through the links on the page, or you might tab through focus areas. So if I do that, for example.
Same page link. Tag, toolbars tag, search using tag, toolbar tag, save the children UK vertical bar globe tag, save the children tag. Search save the children link.
So it's on the search box now. You can't really see the visible focus on there. It's just the sort of a dotted outline, but it is there. So I'm tabbing through items on the page, and now it's not going to play. It should be reading these out now. So I'm going through links. What do we do? Where do we work?
Where we work link. Tag, how you can help link. Tag, news link.
So it's telling you that I'm tabbing. It's also telling you what the content of that link is, and it's also telling you that it's a link. So it's giving you quite a bit of information. It's telling you the structure of the page as well as just the text on the page.
Tag, donate now link.
Okay, so that's one way of going through content. But as you can imagine, if I do that through a page, I'm going to miss things. I'm not going to get to all the content. So I might want to read through the headings on the page, which I can do with a shortcut key.
Transform features heading level 2. Kevin Watkins visits refugees protecting children heading level 3 link. Rohingya crisis appeal heading level 3 link. Early years petition heading level 3 link.
So I'm just skipping through the links, the headings on the page, and it's telling me they're headings and they're also links as well.
Shift tab, a child holds her head while playing early years petition link graphic.
So that's another example of graphics on the page. If you get information on a page that's conveyed through a picture, it's important to have alternative text, and in this case it describes what the image is about. And there's always a debate about how much detail you needed in this description, but it at least at minimum needs to convey any important information. But it's also useful to describe a feeling or something that's being conveyed as well, and obviously this is quite an emotional appeal website.
Samer is treated for malnutrition in Yemen. Yemen crisis donate a day link graphic.
I can also just go through the page using the arrow keys, go up and down, which will take me sequentially through it.
Crisis donate a day. Christmas jumpers in support of Save the Children's Christmas Jumper Day. Blank. Heading level 3 link pay in your Christmas Jumper Day fundraising. Heading level 2 our work in action around the world. And Jaws and a number of other screen readers give you shortcuts to, not just shortcuts to skip through the page, but dialogues that allow you to look at different information on the page. So, for example, I can get a list. Headings list view, pay in your Christmas Jumper Day fundraising, 3, 8 of 9. To move the items, use the arrow keys.
I can get a whole list of headings on the page, which I can go through sequentially. I can sort those if I want to, alphabetically, if that helps. It might help if I'm looking through a series of articles and I know what I'm looking for example, or that might help with links. And it tells me not just the heading text, but it tells me the level of the heading. So it tells me the importance, whether it's a heading level 1, which should be 1 per page, heading level 2, heading level 3, and it should be in a hierarchy on the page, and that helps a screen reader user understand what the hierarchy of the content is. So it's really important to keep to that sort of correct nesting levels of headings.
The world heading leveled. Links list dialog. Links list view. People pose in their Christmas jumpers in support of Save the Children's Christmas Jumper Day. Pay in your Christmas Jumper Day fundraising. 17 of 29. To move the items, use the arrow keys.
As you can see, JAWS reads out a lot of information, and if you were using a screen reader a lot of the time, you'd probably be doing it quicker than that. You'd probably be skipping over things, and you can set things, the level of detail that it reads out to you. You don't have to have all that detail. But from a testing point of view, I always recommend that it's best to use default settings, even the default voice. This is the default voice that comes with JAWS, and it can be a bit overwhelming, but I think it's better to use the sort of default settings for that. So again, I can order things alphabetically, I can go to those links. And this is why it's really important to not have links that say, click here or read more. And if you do, they can be okay when they're read in context, in the middle of a paragraph or in a block of text. But when you read them out of context like this, or if you're skipping through links, it can be somewhat meaningless. What does read more mean? What does click here mean? And although, as a screen reader user, I could go back to that text and find out what it is, that's really difficult and clunky to do. So it's much better to have clear, strong linked text that means, that tells the person exactly where they're going to go to. Just going to show you a bit about how it would work when you're filling in a form, for example.
Or careers, new tab page. Star edited. Type in text. Shift tab. Login link tab. Email star edited. Type in text.
So first thing you notice is it reads out the name of the label of the form control, and that only works if it's correctly labeled. That's a coding thing. If it does, then it's clear what this information is that I need to put in here, so I can type something in. And it beeps when it goes into what's called forms mode, so that you know that you're typing text in.
Period. CM.
And then,
type in text.
So then it's gone to the password field. The asterisk obviously is commonly used to indicate required fields. It's debatable whether that's clear or not from a point of view of usability, but I think most people understand that these days. But you can have hidden text for screen reader users that will explain that better. So that's another way you can do that.
Star, 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 star.
You notice it just reads out a star. That's deliberate for privacy reasons, so that not everyone can hear what I'm typing in. So it's hidden. In the same way it's hidden visually, it's hidden audibly as well.
Tab, last names tab, create account button.
So I've focused on the create account button there. You can't actually see that it's focused on there, but it's read it out. I know it's a button, so I'm assuming that's what I've got to do next. I've actually missed some information out, but perhaps I'll go back to that.
Requires response. Press Alt+N. Would you like to store your password for savethechildren.org.uk careers? Notification bar requires escape.
So it's interesting, you get a clear visual response with error messages and things like that, but it's not particularly clear for a screen reader user who can't see that there's some errors on the form to deal with. So there's a lot of sort of challenges there, and that's why things like screen reader testing is so important. It's really important to do this stuff, to find things that you couldn't necessarily find just by looking at the code. You wouldn't necessarily know this unless you've done this a lot of times, that you need to have information like error messages read out. So as I say, JAWS is the most commonly used screen reader software. NVDA is becoming more popular on Windows, for example. So if you're needing to test things, JAWS is very expensive. So NVDA is a good alternative. There's also a built-in screen reader on Windows called Narrator, which is becoming better. It's not ideal, but it's quite a good alternative if you can't get another screen reader. So what about screen magnification? I mentioned about browser zoom, operating system zoom. So obviously on this page I can zoom into the page if I want to using browser zoom, and that should work and it shouldn't break and things like that. And that gives me a larger screen to look at, larger text. But for a lot of people, that isn't enough. That's not going to be enough magnification, and there are other things that may need to change, like colors and things like that. So if I use Zoomtext, this works across the whole of the operating system. So basically, I can see the whole screen in this way rather than just the browser. So I'm not limited to just what I can see on the browser. You can change, obviously, magnification levels. I've got this set at 5 times, which is a sort of medium magnification, just enough to be able to see the effects of it. But a lot of people would use it a lot higher than that, 10, 20 times, for example, to the extent that you might only see a few characters on page at one time. One of the first things you notice when you're using this is it's difficult to find your way around the screen. So, you can be searching around the screen like this, finding information. And form fields can be pretty tricky, for example, if they're not in line with, or they're not next to the actual form controls, those sort of things. Obviously, you can use things like tab to find my way around the page. So I can tab, and then it will move the visual part of the screen to that point on the screen, so I can see clearly. But it's got to be clear what that means. And this is actually quite a good example because it's got drop-down navigation, but it works well with a keyboard, because sometimes drop-down navigation only works with a mouse or a touchpad. So this is quite good. Without that, you might not see the sub-levels of navigation. So as I say, as well as magnifying, I can do... Now I have lost it. I can change things like the colors. There's various color schemes you can use. Invert brightness is one. Reverse video, they're very similar. But I can see things in a more sort of dark mode if I want to, which can be very useful for a lot of people. I can also do things like change cursors and pointers. You can probably only just see that on the screen, that there's a red cross that appears with the pointer and a large yellow pointer going across the screen. But there's various options you can use, and obviously you can set these settings so they stay between sessions. Zoomtext also has options for built-in screen reader as well. This version is called Zoomtext Reader and includes a cut-down screen reader. I haven't put that on, I've turned that off, but I can have that on as well if I want. So then when I'm going through the page, it should read it out. No, it's not going to read it out. But it would basically read out the content of the page. There's a thing called Zoomtext Fusion, which includes JAWS as screen reader. So it's a full combination of screen reader and screen magnifier. And again, that's very useful for a lot of people to use. I'm going to close down Zoomtext. This just shows how difficult I find it to use. Oh, it started speaking now. Okay, so that's two things then. That's screen reader and Zoomtext screen magnifier. That's two different technologies. Again, as I mentioned, people can use both, maybe using both, maybe using a combination of things. What about when it comes to voice activation? I said that the most commonly used one was Dragon, and I'll start that up now. Dragon started as voice dictation software, so one of the things you have to do with Dragon when you first install it is train it to your voice. It's actually very good at recognizing your voice straight out, but with a bit of training, you just read through a few paragraphs of text, it becomes much better at recognizing your particular way of speaking. You can then also add words to it if you want to make it a more comprehensive glossary, or if you use a lot of technical terms or jargon, you can enhance it in that way. Because it started out as voice dictation software rather than web assistive technology, it has plugins that are used for providing the support within the browser. So there's one for each different browser, but it works pretty well. So if I switch on the microphone, go to sleep. It's really useful to use a headset with Dragon. Again, it will work with a microphone, a standard microphone, but it's going to work a lot better if it can use a headset, a decent headset that will cut out some of the background noise and make sure that your voice is in the right place. So what I wanted to show you with this was some examples of form controls. As I'm talking to you at the moment, it's not taking any notice because I've told it to go to sleep. But if I say, wake up, it won't wake up. Wake up. Page down. Click name. Richard Morton. Click address. This is my address. New line. This is the second line of my address. Go to sleep. So as you see, it can enter into form fields. It can type in reasonably quickly. Well, it can understand me speaking at normal speech rates. I don't have to slow down particularly or speak in any kind of I don't know what's the word. Speaking out words singly. There are a number of different ways of accessing different form controls. Click checkbox. Wake up. Click checkbox. Choose two. Click mushrooms. Click olives. Click pepperoni. Go to sleep. So there I was just clicking on the different options, and clicking a checkbox twice will obviously switch it back off again. So it's very flexible at identifying things from either the type of form control or the name of the label or part of the label. So there, for example, I could have said pizza or toppings and it would select it. If you pick something that's ambiguous, because there are more than one thing on the page with the same thing, it will give you those green boxes that appeared with numbers by the side of them, so it will let you choose which is the appropriate one you want. So if I say wake up, click radio button, go to sleep. So there, just because I've said click radio button, there's three of them there visible. It'll only pick the ones that are visible on the page. It's telling me to choose between 1, 2, or 3. Wake up. Click overnight. Click ground. Go to sleep. So obviously with radio buttons, if I select one and then select another, it will switch between the two. You can only have one radio button active at a time. It gets a bit more tricky with some form controls like select drop downs. Wake up. Click city. Choose one. Go down. Go down. Click city. Choose two. Go down. Go to sleep. So some sort of little techniques and tricks you have to learn with Dragon. I only know a few of them. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be done. I just need to know enough to do sort of testing and things like that. But obviously if I was using it on a regular basis, I would need to know all the tricks that you can use for that. Someone recently has posted about coding using Dragon, and they've set up a load of shortcuts and scripts and things like this to enable them to do much more complex stuff with it. It still can be quite slow, but it can be the difference between someone being able to use this technology or not in some circumstances. But it might be a temporary thing. It might be somebody who has something like RSI or multiple sclerosis, and they need to use keyboard some of the time, but not all the time. So this one's a bit more complex. One where you can choose multiple ones, and I haven't got this to work, but I can try. Wake up. Click Delhi. Click Hong Kong. Go to sleep. The way it's coded, it doesn't seem to accept the names within the select control, and I don't know if there's a way around that technically. But there's always a sort of get out clause with Dragon that you can use, which is what's called mouse grid. Wake up. Wake up. Mouse grid. 5. 1. 2. 2. Click. Go to sleep. So the mouse grid shows a grid of 9 boxes on the screen. You can select numbers 1 to 9, and it will then focus in on the screen until you get to the point where you want to activate it. That's useful for something like this where it's not coded necessarily right to work with Dragon, or it might be something like very useful for things like a media player control, which hasn't been given a proper accessible name. If something doesn't have a correct name, it just has a sort of icon or something like that, but it hasn't got a text name behind it, then Dragon can't recognize what it's called. So you have to use technique like this to do it. Doing that is always going to be a compromise. So if your website works in that way, that means it's not ideal, but it does mean someone can actually get past the barrier. Go to sleep. So that was just a quick whistle-stop showing of 3 different types of assistive technology. Has anyone got any questions? Preferably not technical questions about keystrokes and things like that, because I might not be able to help it.
Can you use Dragon with JAWS as well? Can you use the two together?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah, it's. I've tried it and it does kind of work. I'm not sure. You'd have to make sure that obviously that the microphone isn't picking up the sound from JAWS. So using a headset would be much better for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other question was, I've heard about scripting with JAWS. Do you know much about how that can be used? Because there's a lot of applications that I work with that aren't particularly accessible with JAWS. And I was wondering if scripting would make them a bit more accessible for me.
It could do. Like you, I've heard of it, but I haven't used it myself, so I don't know the technical side of it. But yeah, it should be able to help you with certain things, yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
The next 3 years, where do you see the biggest advances coming from in terms of assistive tech? OS level baked in, or from third-party developers developing their own thing in some sort of marketplace?
That's a good question. I mean, I think accessibility is being taken more seriously by manufacturers such as Microsoft and Apple. They're doing fantastic work with accessibility. I think it's going to be more baked into operating systems. We've seen that with VoiceOver coming into Apple. We've seen that with Windows improving a lot in version Windows 10 with just things like color options and stuff like that, and narrator becoming much more accessible. So I see things becoming more mainstream built into operating systems, but also things like Alexa, things like using mobile devices, Siri and things like that. It's becoming much more mainstream, so people are going to demand that sort of access, whether or not you need it from an accessibility point of view. So I think that will drive things as well. I think that will make things more and more accessible.
Hi, Richard, Frank here.
Hi.
2 things. With the OS, very few people refer to Chrome.
Yeah.
Apple seems to be the favored OS. Yet Google seems to have moved forward quite a lot, and Chrome works across multiple devices.
Yeah.
In terms of voice recognition, it allows you to do things a lot simpler than screen reader.
Yeah.
What would you say over that?
You're talking about Chromebox in particular, or?
No, just Chrome in general.
Yeah, I mean, the only
You
reason...
evaded it earlier. You said this for Apple and Windows, but not Chrome.
Yeah, I mean, that's only, I guess, because from our survey, we found that the majority of users were using Windows. There weren't many using Mac, and there weren't many using Chrome at all. We haven't really got the data on how many people are using that, but yes, you're right. I mean, things are getting better.
So, sorry, the second one is I work with, I help a lot of visually impaired people with their technology, and as you could see yourself when you were navigating earlier, it's very easy to get stuck because the tech didn't do what you expected it to do. And we can see that. For a visually impaired person, they can't. Nor can they see the size of... Generally, the settings menus are still small in comparison to their normal page view. So unless they've got somebody sitting with them, showing them how to change their settings, it doesn't work. Can those settings pages be made larger?
I would hope so. I think, again, with things like Windows, that's becoming more the case, that there's still a sort of hybrid on Windows 10, isn't there? Where there's a lot of old stuff like the control panel and things like that, but a lot of the setting menus are becoming much better from that point of view. And again, with Apple, I don't know enough about Chrome as an operating system, but I'm guessing they're all working towards doing things like that, and that's really important. Yeah, you're right. You need the settings. You need to be able to install the software yourself. You need to be able to do all those things as a visually impaired user or any kind of assistive technology user. You don't want to have to rely on somebody else to set things up for you or fix things when they go wrong.
What was the biggest thing that surprised you about the survey? If there was one thing from the survey that made you go, ooh, that's interesting, what was it and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Possibly that virtually nobody used TalkBack on Android. I guess that may have changed in the last 18 months, but no, you're shaking your head there. We don't see any evidence of that. So the majority of people, although there's a lot of Android phones out there, they don't seem to have much in the way of accessibility. So, or rather, not necessarily much in the way of accessibility, they're not used as much, and that might be a limitation of the technology, or it might be just familiarity. A number of reasons for that, yeah.
Two questions. Do you plan to do another survey for the screen reader, the Assistive Technology, or is that kind of a one-off?
I'm sure we will. It's kind of over to Al when we like it.
Yeah, so we are hoping to run the survey again. We are chatting with some people like the BBC and with RNIB and various people, the Business Disability Forum. The plan is to do a much bigger, well, not a bigger survey, but do a survey with more partners so we can promote it and get far more people to complete it. With this survey, I think we had 1,500 people complete it, but there was only about 700 valid responses. There's obviously a lot more assistive technology users in the UK, so we want to kind of bump those numbers up and get an even better picture.
Sounds great. Second part of the question, when you do your assistive technology testing, such as with JAWS and Dragon, do you kind of use the latest version, or do you test with a couple of different versions, go back a version, or do you, what's your plan there?
We do use a couple of different versions. It depends how extensive we want to test something, but if we're doing a full test, then we would say use a version, and we picked on version 15, I think, from the Assistive Technology survey as a sort of older version. So it needs to work with version 15 and probably the latest version, which would either be version 18 or version 2018, which has just come out. And with JAWS, that's particularly important because a lot of people don't upgrade the software very often because it is so expensive. So people are often several versions behind, and JAWS does change a lot each version, or tends to change quite a lot each version, yeah. So we have a sort of test matrix, if you like, of recommended versions of things like JAWS, things like NVDA, Dragon, and Zoomtext, yeah.
Do you have an opinion on kind of like, well, plugins? I mean, I don't want to get into the whole debate with the browser layout thing, but just in general about sort of plugins that provide functionality per site.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion. My opinion's probably controversial. I kind of think there are disadvantages to them, not because of security necessarily, that's a whole other area, but because they're only on one website or only on one browser, that sort of thing, that it means you don't have it across the whole operating system. Is it that useful? I don't know. If it's something that you can't manage without, then that's probably not going to be that useful if you've only got it on one website or a series of websites, but not all the websites you use. On the other hand, if perhaps it's something you use occasionally or you need because you're dyslexic and you need to read stuff aloud, the literacy type software, and you can manage in other ways, then maybe it does help. I've seen a lot of tweets today saying it's evil, but I don't hold that view myself. I think it's a bit nuanced. There are good aspects to it, but there are disadvantages as well. So I'm going to sit on the fence a bit.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm particularly excited by what people like Microsoft are doing with Edge, because they are introducing lots of those kind of third-party plugins into the browser. It makes much more sense for it to be in the browser, because then that will follow you around every website on the web, rather than relying on every website owner to have to pay and drop that in. It makes much more sense for it to be a personalized experience and it follows you around a web. I guess what the challenge is that lots of browsers do provide that sort of functionality, but lots of users don't know it's there. So in my mind, we actually need to be helping to educate users to know what is available to them. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I'm keen. I'm planning on building a website for the London Accessibility Meetup, and I'm going to be working with a designer from the Home Office to help us design that website. And I've got a really good idea about how to solve that problem, so we're going to try and implement that on the London Accessibility website. I need to find time how to do that, but we have a plan. So yeah, watch this space.
With using Screen Reader, obviously it relies a lot on the code behind the web page. For using something like Dragon, does it rely on the same types of things, or is it based on, like you mentioned, scripts that people write?
Generally, most assistive technology relies on good standards-based code. So if you code things not for screen readers and not for Dragon, but you code it for good general usage, you'll find that most of it will work with assistive technology anyway. So for example, if you make something fully keyboard accessible, that's going to be a great start with making it work with a screen reader, because screen readers use keyboard extensively. If you're using the standard native components like form components, links, buttons, all those sort of things, they have a lot of built-in accessibility. So you're going to find that they're generally going to work pretty well. It's when you start producing custom components and things like that, you've got to do a lot more work to make things fully accessible. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, if you code using standards and the native controls, you're going to find you're not going to have that much difficulty making things work with most assistive technologies.
One of the most coding for accessibility is kind of what a lot of people think accessibility is kind of all about, and it's a really important part of accessibility, and that's partly why I've tried to combine these two talks of kind of code is important for assistive technologies, but you'll actually find there's actually lots of other things that you need to consider to make something truly accessible. So hopefully you'll learn some really interesting stuff from Jamie, who'll be talking after the break.
From a testing point of view, from say a small agency who doesn't have the budget to buy these very expensive tools, are there any ways around it? So things like browser stacks good for browser testing. Is there any way that, I don't know, is there anything you know of that helps do that?
It's not easy to use. I mean, things like browser stack can be good for browser testing, but you can't really use stuff that will do assistive technology testing in that way. I'd always recommend getting the tools if you can, but there are a few free tools out there. So NVDA is free. Narrator is free. If you've got Apple, then obviously that's built in with VoiceOver, things like that. Dragon, obviously you've got to pay money for that, but that's not a particularly expensive one compared to say JAWS. And use the technology you've got. Use the assistive technology you've got built into a lot of things. And as I say, voice recognition is becoming more common on mobile, so that's pretty useful to test just using things like that. Yeah.
Have you ever, two questions, had any communications with these companies to any avail for getting free copies for developers? Because giving them away for free to developers, to me, makes sense for advancing it.
I haven't personally. I think generally they're not keen to do that. I know people who've tried and they're very restrictive. And
so there's an update from JAWS. So once upon a time, you weren't allowed to use the 45-minute free trial for development purposes, but that's been updated very recently. So developers can use the 45-minute trial for testing purposes. Yeah.
That's quite useful, and it gives you, it's 40 minutes, it just allows you to do that testing, but then if you go over that time, you have to reboot the whole machine. So it's a compromise, but you know, if you want to do a bit of a quick test on one page, that can be quite useful, yeah.
And secondly, what is your opinion on websites having a sort of clone or a sister site that is much more accessible than their parent site?
I'd say don't do it. I think it's a really bad idea. It goes back to the bad old days when people used to say you could have a text alternative. I think going back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 1, you could have, if your website was inaccessible, you could have an accessible alternative. It's a really bad idea because it means you've got to keep two things maintained, and you're not necessarily making it fully accessible, particularly not if you just have something that's text. It's much better to make your website as accessible as you can to as many people as possible.
Let's say you're in a lift with a developer from this building,
right,
and you had from the floor to the ceiling to tell them something useful. What would you tell them?
I'd tell them to go and watch somebody who really uses assistive technology using it. So whether that's a screen reader, whether that's Dragon, find somebody who actually uses this technology not just for testing, but because they need it to access services, they need it to get information.
Same question, but now I'm a tester in a lift with you. This lift might get a bit cramped.
A tester? Why would that be different? I'm not sure. No, I think I'd say the same thing to a tester, to be honest.
Visual designer?
Yep, same.
It's a big lift.
It's a big lift. I'd have one message for everyone, I think, yeah.
So I've got a question back. So for how many people was that the first time they'd seen a screen reader? Put your hand up if that was the first time you'd seen one in action. So that's probably about 10 people. First time of seeing screen magnification software. So that's about 10 people. Okay, that's pretty good. And first time of seeing speech recognition software in action. So slightly more, so it's about 20 or 30 people. And then flip it on its head. How many people here use an assistive technology themselves? So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Keep your hand up if that's a screen reader. So you've got 3 users. Put your hand up if you use speech recognition software. So that's 3 users, 4 users, 5 users. Put your hand up if you use screen magnification software. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cool, okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Richard, for sharing that with people. Thank you.